up and ready. And also, if at the end of our time you were hoping to hear something more or something different, let me know so I can incorporate it in for next week. So, who cares? Well, I care because it was my employment for the last 5 years. And obviously doctors and nurses care, and families and patients care, and so there's a whole atmosphere of people who come in with different values, different perspectives, a different set of where they want their life to go, and for the healthcare team, how they want to serve others and have that work benefit others. And so it's a community of caring, and sometimes there'll be conflicts. And what the doctor thinks is the appropriate way to proceed differs from the patient or the family, or the nurse is even kind of doing a head tilt about, what are we doing here? What are we trying to accomplish? So within that community of people who are caring for a particular person, there will be conflicts due to different values and goals, and an ethicist goes in and takes into account all those various perspectives and values and takes each person seriously and then comes up with recommendations to the stakeholders on how to find a way through that is ethically defensible. I'm going to read this cartoon since the font may not be big enough for everybody. My boss wants me to integrate a great product with a terrible one just to validate our merger. Is it ethical for me to stall for a month until he forgets what he asked for? And the boss says, sure, you can even hit him with a rock to speed up the forgetting. And Dilbert says, maybe I'm asking the wrong ethicist. So ethics is simply about finding a good decision that we can defend. And it doesn't mean we come up with the right decision, because right and wrong sounds like it has a very bright line. And when we're trying to make a decision in the moment with partial information, sometimes a good decision, based on what we know in the moment, is great. And to try and come up with the right decision is looking for perfection that will often elude us. And I'm going to offer you a thought experiment, and there's going to be a couple poll questions. And I'm looking for your responses. People remotely will be able to do that on their computers, but I'll ask for a show of hands, we're in here, when I get to a question. So we're going to watch this video clip, and partway through we're going to pause it. And I'm counting on Kyle to make me look good. Which at 67 is a challenge.
Grammarly helps make your writing clear and concise, no matter where you are. Compose a cover letter that stands out, thanks to flawless writing and compelling word choice.
The Trolley Problem. Runaway trolley. 4 men in its path. All of them will die. But wait, you can pull a lever. You can change the trolley's course to another track where only one man stands. You have a choice. Kill one or let 4 die. What are you going to do?
I would pull it.
I'd pull the lever and divert the train.
Yes, I would absolutely pull the switch.
Most people say, yes, that's a morally right thing to do, because what you're doing is essentially the utilitarian thing.
That means having one person die isn't as bad as having 4 people die.
Absolutely. You're saving 4 lives. There's a
So here's your poll question. Are you going to pull the switch? That means the train isn't going to go on its natural course. You're going to divert it, and it's going to kill 1 person, and 4 lives will be spared. Who's going to pull the switch? Show of hands, or online respond. Wave them high so I can see. How many? 1, 2, 3. The switch is right in front of you as you're walking across this area. You can't yell at the workmen because they're wearing ear protection and using loud equipment. It's a binary choice. You can't change the rules of the thought experiment. Okay? You have a choice to pull it or to not. I can't change the conditions. Who's going to pull it? Who's going to pull the switch? I see a majority. Who is going to choose to not pull the switch? They're going to fold their hands. 1 person. So some of you didn't raise your hands. Guess what happens by default? The train collects the 4 people and kills them. So how did it go online, Kyle? Okay. We may hear from them another way another day. So most people would say it's better if we can save 4 lives. Although 1 lone person chose to not pull the switch. And here's 2 competing moral theories. The utilitarian view says, what's the best outcome? How do we produce the greatest happiness for the largest number of people? And deontology comes from the Greek word duty, and that says, forget outcomes. Those are too speculative. We can't be sure what will happen. Choose what the right thing to do is in every case. And many people who won't pull the switch say, I can reluctantly allow the trolley to kill 4 people, but I can't pull a switch and have my action result in somebody's death because I have a duty to not kill the innocent. So there's the 2 theories, and they play into healthcare. We'll see when we do a case study. But let's look at another scenario.
third equivalent scenario.
Same situation. Runaway trolley. 4 men will die. But this time you're on a bridge, and there's a man there. He's fat. Fat enough to stop the trolley and save the 4 men. But he won't jump. He'll need to be pushed. Can you push the man over the edge?
I don't think that would be a possibility at all.
And I don't think this be justified.
I can't do that.
Most people say, no, that's not an appropriate thing to do. This is a real mystery because the outcomes are the same. If all you really care about is what is the consequences of your action, you should feel morally at ease with pushing the person off the bridge if you felt at ease with flipping the switch before.
So instead of walking through the rail yard with a switch in front of you, you're now walking on a bridge over the rail yard. You've got a minor in physics. You can judge that this person has enough mass to divert and deflect the train. And if you take enough steps back and hit him high in the shoulders, you can accomplish saving the lives of those 4 people in a slightly different way. How many people are going to help the fat man do the right thing? Give him a nice shove. 0 hands going up in the room. I don't know where it is online. Kyle can maybe update us when things are tabulated. So how many of you are going to, if you're all not going to push them, then that makes it clear that you're going to simply not do that. But the majority of you chose to pull a switch, kill 1 to save 4. What is different about this one? Raise your hand and I'll call on you. Yes? Right. So the result is still the same, that you're going to kill one to save four, but at a visceral level, it feels problematic. Yes? Right. And ethically, some ethicists would say that defense of not saving the four people because you didn't want to end one life is a bit disingenuous to say, well, I don't want to feel badly that I personally did it. But if you really want to save four lives versus one, the ethicist is stepping aside from our feelings and saying, this choice is defensible. And I've presented this at a number of presentations and workshops and so on. And one reason to not push him is that the man on the side track didn't express a preference. This guy said, I'm not going to jump. So you are, in terms of a duty, violating his autonomy. And you shouldn't, if you're a duty-based person, violate another person's expressed wishes, apart from the outcomes. One nurse said, I would not pull the switch and kill that person, but I would run screaming and waving my arms toward the four, figuring that they've got four sets of eyes and ears, whereas the one person only has one set of eyes and ears, so there's 4 times a greater chance of self-rescue among the four. So I'm not going to kill that person and hope that one of the four they'll be able to self-rescue. Now, you're not going to have the time in the moment to do that calculation, so it's often visceral that people tend to go one direction or the other. Think about outcomes versus think about our duties. So I'm going to try and advance this now. There we go. So here's a little more depth on the consequence-based or utilitarian view. I tend to not read slides. Can you see that in the back? You're literate, most of you. So John Stuart Mill, this dead white European male, said that we should be based upon outcomes. We need to weigh what will create the greatest happiness, the greatest good for the largest number of people. And that had a great deal of applause when he first presented that in the 1800s. That's Immanuel Kant, another dead white European male. And his duty-based model says that we have certain obligations to do things that are right in themselves. That over time, we've said there are things we should do and things we just shouldn't do. Don't worry about consequences, that's too speculative. For example, stopping for red lights in our society is a duty. Or coming to a full stop for a stop sign. It's put into the law that we have a duty to come to a full stop. And I wonder, have any of you ever gone through a red light on purpose by choice? Raise your hand. You're in good company, I have too. When Dana and I heard that our daughter was in labor and began bleeding and was having a stat C-section, as we drove to the hospital, I got to a red light, looked both ways, and kept going. There was nobody there. So I justified that based upon the outcome. So although we may feel certain times we have duties, we may in a certain situation look at the consequences or outcomes of following that duty. So most of us kind of have a hybrid approach. For example, don't murder an innocent person would be a duty. And I think most people would agree about that. But maybe sometimes the death of an innocent can produce a greater good. Like we should say, I have a duty to not end my life prematurely, but if I jump on a grenade to save the lives of 4 others, then that might become altruistic due to the outcome. So many people find that they bounce back and forth between both theories. Most people in healthcare follow duties. Hippocratic Oath, this is a portion of it. The bottom sentence, I will not use the knife, not even verily on sufferers from stone, but I will give place to such as are craftsmen therein. Back then, surgeons were considered like plumbers. They were like craftsmen. A physician could finesse things, recommend medications or rest or traction, but to cut into a human body was considered barbaric. So that's why gallstones, kidney stones, they'd hand them over to the barber or plumber or whoever would actually violate the integrity of a person's skin. They had a duty to not cut somebody open. And confidentiality is honored there. Whatsoever I shall see or hear in the courts of my profession, I will neither divulge or I will hold such things to be holy secrets. So healthcare providers are often very duty-based in saying there's some things I just won't do. However, overall, doctors are often thinking about outcomes, and they're weighing the burden of the treatment versus the likelihood of a benefit. And duties may not give them guidance when they have to actually make a clinical decision or write some orders. Most of you probably fall under one or the other as a general template for your life. First one, utilitarian or consequence-based. Or duty-based. Now, if you're willing to declare, how many of you would say in your life generally you are duty-based? Follow your obligations, don't overthink things, do what the right directs you. And how many of you would say, that's well and good generally, but I think my fallback template is to look at consequences, outcomes. And that's the way I tend to make decisions. Now, I think more than one person has raised hands on both, which means they're recognizing that they're a hybrid. And most people in that boat follow the ethics code of it depends. Tell me more so that I can try and make a decision that I can sleep with. And what does the gospel of Jesus Christ expect of us? Was Jesus duty-based or looking at outcomes? Defend your answer. Yes. It depends. Because you can find some sayings of Jesus that might lean one way, or it might be more outcome-based. You've heard it said, these are your duties, but I say to you, this is the way to go. But feeding the poor and sticking to a certain rule, like you shouldn't heal on the Sabbath, he'd say, forget the rules, do what's right. So Jesus certainly was able to blend both perspectives. And I think that for most physicians, they tend to blend them as well. They have a duty to follow what is the best scope of practice that's proven through science. Always do that. You can never be sure what will happen. But in some cases, I'm going to try this new medication because I'm throwing a Hail Mary. We haven't got anything in hand. And you get the patient's consent to do something experimental in the moment that deviates from the standard of care. You with me? Questions about those two theories? Or complaints? So let's look at a case study. 56-year-old woman arrives in the ER with breathlessness, and her husband agrees with having her intubated and admitted to the ICU. So she's going to be on a breathing machine. She has a history of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, chronic lung disease that's usually progressive, and her husband says that she made him promise to not have her on a ventilator for more than 3 days because she dreads being kept on such machinery long term. She knows the day's going to come with this disease progressing that all the medical care in the world may not be able to pull her out of the fire. On day 2, she's slowly improving, and the husband tells the doctor of his pledge to his wife. So you got the scene? Woman's on a ventilator, she's in ICU. Her durable power of attorney for health care, her surrogate decision maker, is saying, she made me promise not more than 3 days on this machinery. So he has what he feels is a duty. If you make a promise, keep your promises. I mean, on his wedding day, he said, for better or worse, sickness and health, the wedding day is all about vows and sticking with something. And so he feels a strong obligation to be her advocate. On day 3, the husband insists that she be removed from the ventilator. The doctor says that she continues to improve and that in 48 hours or so, she could probably be extubated and recover well. But if the support is removed now, she runs a significant risk of declining and not surviving. The husband tearfully insists that he be allowed to honor his vow to his wife to help prevent her worst fear being realized of being stuck on a machine. So the husband wants to honor his duty, thereby expressing deontology, what an obligation might be that you follow through with. The physician has a utilitarian view. He recognizes the promise made, but he sees a case where he has seen many patients before. If you stay the course while they're improving, stay the course another day or two, and you could have a very good outcome, and it's very likely that she'll be able to get home to her previous condition. And you get called in as the ethicist. What do? Continue the treatment amid an atmosphere of a good outcome being possible, maybe even likely, or stop the treatment to honor the husband's understanding of what he felt his wife would want. So, you're the ethicist. How many of you would recommend that you honor that husband's commitment because he's basing it on what he thinks his wife would want, and you say, it's ethically sound to remove the ventilator. She may survive with or without it, but it's ethically sound to remove the ventilator to honor what she said she'd want in such a situation. How many recommend removing the ventilator? 2 hesitant hands went up. And again, if it's a binary choice, the rest of you are saying, stay the course for another 24, 48 hours, and then we have another conversation. Like some people would say, oh, stay the course for 48 hours and then take her off. No. A wiser way to go is, let's go 24, 48 hours, and then we'll have another conversation. Rather than commit to a certain decision later, you commit to a plan to talk again. And I don't know, Kyle, if you're getting responses online, and it may be that we review them next week if the tech part of it is challenging us, or people online say, I'm not accountable, I'm not in a room, I'm not going to stick my neck out and make a decision. I'm not going to make a call. Oh, do you want to know what happened? Okay. So I let the doctor stew for a little bit. I didn't leap in with a recommendation, but I was observing the scene, and he said, she's tolerating the ventilator pretty well. Let's see if we can lighten the sedation and see if she can add her voice to this decision. Husband agrees. Sedation's lightened. She wakes up pretty quickly. They're using a drug that has a very short time that you back off. A person wakes up pretty well, pretty quickly. And so the doctor explains the dilemma, points out who's in the room, and she's tracking with her eyes. And he said, "I hope you understand." And she nodded. And he said, "So I'm going to ask you some yes or no questions. Would you like the ventilatory treatment to continue?" She nodded. And he goes, "Maybe part of you would like the ventilator to just be removed and see how it goes. If you'd like that to happen, please nod." And she went like that. So she answered the question 2 different ways, but congruently, which is a good way to check whether she's really alert enough. And the husband got really upset. And he said, "Honey, you made me promise not more than 3 days. I'm confused. Why don't you want to stick with it?" And she went like this. And they brought her a pad of paper and a big Sharpie, and she wrote, "Keep vent on." And he goes, "But why?" And she wrote, "I've had a change of perspective." Right? So, happy ending. She stayed on. She recovered well and went home within a week. So what was that? Was that a duty-based decision or an outcome-based decision? It was a creative doctor who said, "I think we need more information, and I think we can get some more." And when the patient says, "I want this," you get to very compelling reasons not to honor that. And I'm sure the husband and wife had lengthy conversations once she got home. He didn't do anything wrong, but it put him in a bind. Yes? Help me understand. And the wife says, "I've tried to help you understand things over and over and over. Why should I waste my breath yet again?" So those are 2 theories. We're going to discuss 2 more and have a case about them. Rights-based ethics. People have God-given rights. Right to life. A right to be able to make choices, good or bad. We're given free will. Additional rights might come through a code or legislative act from a government, like the Bill of Rights, right? The first set of amendments to our Constitution. Or there may be other rights that come through common consent or a particular context. I am adjunct faculty at NNU. A student has a right to hear from me why they got an F. They have a right to expect to know how I justify giving them a certain grade, although they never ask why I gave them an A. Or if you're employed somewhere and you are being disciplined, you have a right for human resources to come explain to you the rules of employment, why the manager has the right to do this or do that. You've got rights within that particular job situation. Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence say we have a right to 3 particular things, and Benjamin Franklin endorsed these. Life, we must indeed all hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately. Right? We're going to try and collectively protect our individual lives. We have a right to life unencumbered by the king. Do you know what the second one is? Liberty. Any society that would give up a little liberty to gain a little security will deserve neither and lose both. That word liberty is embraced by a group of people called libertarians. And anything that violates individual liberty for them is a huge threat, a big no-no. And that's where rights-based ethics comes in. That I have a right to make choices, and I can even make bad choices, but those are my rights. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Ben Franklin again. Beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. Can I get an amen? So John Stuart Mill, who we heard about earlier in terms of utilitarian ethics, also had a libertarian view. The only purpose for which power can be rightly exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or moral, is not a sufficient warrant. He cannot rightfully be compelled to do or forbear because it would be better for him to do so, because it would make him happier, because in the opinion of others, to do so would be wise or even right. There are good reasons for remonstrating with him, or reasoning with him, or persuading him, or entreating him, but not for compelling him, or visiting with any evil in case he do otherwise, unless he's going to harm others. So harm is the only trigger for interfering in another person's choices. Not harm to themselves, but harm to others. Hence, people smoked cigarettes for decades. More and more evidence came along that smoking would cause cancer. You put warnings on the cigarette packets, then the person makes their own choice. You can't tell them to smoke or not. Then secondhand smoke came into play. You can smoke, but not in an enclosed metal tube flying at 10,000 feet above the earth in a plane. They started with smoking and non-smoking sections. Do any of you remember that era? How much did you feel you weren't getting contaminated by the smoke of the person 2 rows in front of you? Not very much. So, ban smoking on the plane, because you're going to harm others. And one ethicist says, totally unrestricted liberties has never been a promising way to organize society. Vaccines, mandates, requiring people to be vaccinated, requiring people to wear masks, and libertarians, speaking of Emmett earlier, which is a libertarian stronghold, I went into an Albertsons there after preaching at that church, and about 1/3 of the people were wearing masks at the height of the pandemic. I came into Albertsons in Eagle, 98% are wearing masks. So with that sense of the libertarian view, their argument would ethically be, you can't tell me I have to wear a mask when I choose to shop, to put food on my table. I am not carrying any symptoms. I wouldn't come here if I were. I'd be at home. And the connection between me wearing a mask or not, and you getting COVID in a way that's lethal to you or somebody you meet, that connection is so thin that you can't compel me to wear a mask or compel me to be vaccinated. And throughout American history, there's been plenty of times when people were compelled, like smallpox epidemics, but the word mandate is interesting because Maundy Thursday is Mandate Thursday. Jesus said, I give you a new commandment. So in the Christian faith, mandates from God are part of our world. Mandates from another human being, who's as likely to be a sinner as me, or maybe more so, I'm not going to wear it if I'm a libertarian. This is from a book called Pox, An American History. Individual liberty and property rights melted away before the state's power, indeed its inherent legal duty, deontology, sneaking in there, to defend the population from peril. So during the smallpox epidemic at the end of the 1800s, down south, they would blockade towns that had a high infection rate. You can't leave town, and nobody's going in. And if you've got smallpox, You live at the end of town in these houses, and if you're a resident of the town and you don't have smallpox, you live in those houses. So you'd move people around. There were massive protests, especially among African Americans, who had been released from slavery a decade or two earlier and said, my life is dependent on me having freedom of movement to find work. And if you say, I can't go find employment, I can't take care of me and my own, it feels like slavery all over again. And they even went into tenements in New York, police at the end of billy clubs, and vaccinated people. So those are certainly extreme examples that libertarians could point to say, you shouldn't be pushing me around. But I would think that if a new strain of polio hit our shores where there was a 80% chance of paralysis or death, libertarians might change their tune, because there's no atheists in a foxhole and there's no libertarians during a lethal pandemic. But this one isn't so lethal. Yeah, we got millions of people dying, but percentage-wise, libertarians say, you can't compel me. My individual rights carry the day. That's one more theory of how we make wise decisions. One more theory, and then we'll be almost done. Communitarian ethics. Individuals have rights, but they also have responsibilities to the rest of society. When my wife and I built a home up Roby Creek Road, which is, Idaho City is a kind of a libertarian, another stronghold, I could have said, we need to get rid of our human waste. So I'm gonna dig a hole 5 feet deep, put gravel in the bottom, and I think we'll call it good. We'll just have an outhouse. And the people who lived downstream from that water table might say, not so fast, as, hey, it's my property. I've got rights, I'm digging straight down. Libertarian. And they would say, no. The risk to us is real, and you can't see it, but it is real enough that you can't do that, and society could, at the point of a gun, stop me from doing that, because I'm harming others. So communitarian says, what's best for the group? Churches debated whether they're going to require or request people to wear masks at worship. This congregation and its leaders said, the well-being of the group carries more weight than the rights of an individual to refuse to wear a mask. Because a mask isn't a burden, it's an inconvenience. If it's a burden for you health-wise, you wear a mask, or we'll provide an opportunity for you to worship at home. So you still have the right to worship, but maybe not in person unless you have a communitarian ethic that's taking into account other people. And a libertarian might say, yeah, but the connection between me wearing a mask in the back row and somebody in here getting a deadly disease is pretty thin. A communitarian says, yes, it's thin, but it exists. Therefore, we're going to require you to wear a mask or strongly shame you if you don't. Global warming. I have an individual right to drive a car that gets 14 miles to the gallon on oil-based fuel. And some people are saying, with global warming, we have to change our patterns, change our choices. Some of them will be very uncomfortable. You may resist, but we got a problem. Libertarians are going to say, really, can you prove it? Can you prove that me driving my Outback that passes emission controls is really going to kill the planet in 40 years? If you can't prove it, you can't restrict my rights. So you hear that tension between two ethics principles. Communitarian also would say we have responsibility to the larger group, and this came home when my father was telling me about going across the Atlantic in a convoy in World War II. And there was a plane up above off an aircraft carrier looking for German subs as the convoy steamed along as a group for group protection. And the pilot missed the wire on the carrier, and the plane went into the ocean, and he was able to get out and pop up a life raft, and he was able to get out of the plane before it sunk. And everybody went along the rail of the ship and saw this guy in his life raft, and he waved at them. And a couple of them waved back, but most turned away from the rail because they suddenly realized that in a war, your individual life can be forfeit for the greater effort of the war. And that was evident when they saw the first casualty going in the wake of all these ships, because they didn't have helicopters yet to do a rescue. They couldn't stop the whole convoy for one person, and they couldn't send one ship out to get him as the rest of the convoy steamed, because that ship alone would be a sitting duck for a submarine. So in healthcare, we usually consider what the needs of the patient are and what the patient wants, but in a communitarian ethic, you're also thinking about the family. How is this going to impact the husband, the kids? Tough decisions have to be made. Maybe if the patient said, I don't want my grandchildren to be deprived of part of my estate to help pay for college. That's one of my values, one of my goals. I'm connected to others, and I don't want to whittle away all my money on a long shot recovery. I've had a full life. Don't keep pushing this rock uphill. This is a communitarian ethicist quote. So he's arguing the communitarian ethic isn't just about not harming members of society, but maybe we should make choices that advance the well-being of other members of society as well. So his last line or two, this is a chilling embrace of individual freedom as the hallmark of a good society. So he is a communitarian, not a libertarian.
Are we to embrace that last sentence?
Pardon?
Are you calling us to embrace that last sentence?
No, I'm telling you that these are four different theories, and different ethicists will embrace one over against the others, and then when you have a case come up, you've got to separate the weeds from the grass. So can there be a tension between individual liberties and your duty to wider society? I believe there can be a tension between them. You can recognize both, but then how do you decide which way you go? And I think that to be totally in one ethics theory alone without taking into consideration other perspectives and other ways of looking at solutions is impoverished. Whichever one you're embracing. 2 quotes from Scripture and then we're done. So I would argue that various theories weave their way in and out of our decisions, yet Scripture seems to indicate that the idea of community, of the fellowship of believers, is a good starting place. And that to say, this is what I want, this is what I need, no one can tell me otherwise, doesn't seem to be in the spirit of the gospel. And what ethic I might embrace as a citizen of the United States who believes in the Declaration of Independence might be at odds with a theory that I might embrace from a Christian viewpoint or a Christian lens, and how do we reconcile those challenges within us, much less within wider society? Done. So, questions, potential answers, and next week we're going to look at some more tools to answer the question of which theory should carry the day when we're trying to apply it in a practical sense. Yes?
Do you have a case study that pits communitarianism and libertarian against each other?
Yeah, I would think it'd be the recent mandate from our president that you have to get vaccinated, or the business has more than 100 employees, they have to ensure that those employees are vaccinated. That would be a communitarian ethic, which violates the libertarian ethic. He has a mandate light that says if they aren't willing to be vaccinated, they need to be tested once a week in order to protect the well-being of those around them. So if you don't want something injected into your body, we want to take something out of your body and have you spit into a tube. And I would think most libertarians would say, that is an infringement on my rights. I'm willing to give up my spit for you to test to make sure that I do not carry COVID when I come into the workplace, because I'm not willing to be vaccinated. I don't want something put into my body, but I'll produce something from my body. But then a conspiracy theorist who's a libertarian with a capital L would say, they're going to take your spit, and they're going to learn more about you, and they're going to do things to you. So any theory taken to its extremes becomes a little bit cray-cray. And that's any theory, in my view.
A person with some common sense may say, if Biden can tell me that I have to wear a mask, what is it he cannot tell me to do?
Well, I think there's a legitimate argument for saying the government cannot compel me to take a medical treatment such as a vaccine. They have to give me an accommodation that can still protect wider society. So I think that it's a legitimate argument to say you can't force me to stick needles in my arm or my children's arms. Did I answer your question, or are you thinking of something else?
When I'm saying, let's rephrase it. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not a libertarian. I was trained as a research psychologist, and the research for wearing a mask is very thin. Again, he does not have the right. If he can tell me to do this, he can tell me to do other things with very little justification, and that is the problem here.
You're concerned about the slippery slope.
Say that again?
You're concerned about a slippery slope. If we cave to this, then who knows where that might go. Yeah. So, and I'm going to argue with you in a sense of philosophers arguing, not to be dismissive of you, okay? If you don't wear a mask, you don't get a vaccine, are there other things you're willing to do to protect others in society in case you're carrying the disease and it's not yet symptomatic?
That does not answer the general question. I agree with you. I'm vaccinated.
Okay, right.
If he can tell you to do this, you're pointing the question. What is it he cannot tell you to do?
Well, I don't think he can tell you that you have to be vaccinated to be a citizen of the United States. Now, that may put a crimp on your employment options. Yeah. Unless you are willing to be tested once a week. Which I think is a reasonable thing to expect to protect other members of society. But do you think that being tested once a week is not a reasonable expectation?
I think that we're worried about the slippery slope.
Right. So for the slippery slope argument, Google slippery slope argument fallacy, F-A-L-L-A-C-Y, which isn't your field in pharmacology, but in the field of philosophy. And that a slippery slope argument says, if I have to wear my seatbelt, then the next thing you know, they're going to expect that I've got to wear a helmet. And the next thing you know, I'm not going to be able to drive my car at all. So a slippery slope argument usually says, I don't want to do this, but if I cave to it, they're going to expect this, and then it gets to a worst case scenario that is not actually likely to be on the slope and doesn't recognize that we can stop the process and protest against it at a lot earlier stages. So the slippery slope argument in the philosophy world doesn't carry as much traction as some others.
So, do you have a medical application that you as an ethicist has run into in the hospital, which helps to remove it from a political and mental exercise to a practical application?
The only one I can think of is where St. Al's and St. Luke's were requiring staff to be vaccinated, or they would lose their employment, potentially, unless they had a medical exemption. And there's some medical conditions where a vaccination can put you at risk of a disease or a very consequential outcome. And though you could also have a religious conviction, where you could say, based upon my faith and how I view God and my activity in creation, I don't feel that God wants me to get this vaccine. It goes contrary to my religious inclinations. And that religion exemption was also offered to people. But if you didn't have a medical exemption, and you didn't have a religious exemption, and you didn't feel it was ethical to create a religious exemption, to pretend that way to get out of it, which I have a lot of respect for people who didn't just sign a piece of paper. They actually said, well, I don't have a religious exemption. I have a personal exemption. And I would argue that a personal exemption based upon your family and your values or whatever they are should carry as much traction as a religious one. Otherwise, atheists don't have options, which doesn't make sense to me in a pluralistic society. So how does a healthcare organization say they're promoting the health of wider society and providing for the safety of their staff during a pandemic without requiring certain behaviors? Like, you can't visit a family member in the hospital during a pandemic while that person's dying of COVID, because the risk to you and wider society and to staff is the increase of spread, because you're not going to be wearing the level of protection the staff are. And that goes against a libertarian sense that I should have the right to be with my dying loved one. So it's an example, but it's not necessarily a solution. It's a medically based situation where they're trying to weigh risks, benefits, individual rights, responsibilities to the wider society. And I like your questions because you're putting me on the spot to say, is there one ethics theory that I embrace 100% all the time? And I would say the ethicists' back out responses, it depends. Let's talk about a case, and then we can reason through why this decision seems more justifiable than that one. But when we get into government and politics and those big pictures, you'll have 10 people and 30 opinions. Thank you for your attentiveness, near and far. Hope to see you all next week when we'll do deeper dives.